All right, good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce Cheryl Sikora to you. Cheryl's earliest gardening memories were in her grandmother's backyard, where she had a very small vegetable garden and a very large cherry tree, both of which produced the best tasting fruits and vegetables in memory. As an adult, Cheryl dabbled with gardening in her own yard, and everything she learned was by trial and error. In 2018, she became a master gardener, and she believes it is the best thing she has ever done for herself. She enjoys volunteering in the many gardens and programs offered by the Master Gardeners. Cheryl has lived with her husband in Monmouth County for over 30 years, and she is the proud mother of 2 adult daughters. All right, thank you, Cheryl, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Debbie. Can everyone hear me okay? I just want to thank you all for being here this morning. And as you've probably guessed, we're here to talk about starting seeds indoors. My focus today is going to be mostly on vegetables, but if you're all into flowers and not so much vegetables, please don't turn that dial. Much of this information can be applied to flower seeds as well. This talk is intended to take you from the initial planting stage to the moment your seedlings are ready to be transplanted outside in your garden. And anyone can do this on a small scale with just a few necessary pieces of equipment and supplies. I first attempted this myself in 2018 after becoming a master gardener and falling in love with our PAR garden. PAR, P-A-R, is an acronym for Plant a Row for the Hungry. And in this garden, master gardener interns plant 8 rows and donate 100% of their harvest to local food banks. I learned a lot in that garden, and believe me, if I can do this successfully, so can you. I want to share my successes and my failures with you, as well as give you some helpful tips based on my 6 big mistakes, or as I like to call them, my learning experiences. So let's get started. Why would you want to start seeds indoors? Number 1, get a head start on the season. Starting seeds inside means you have a nice hardy plant to put out in the garden at just the right time. There's no need to wait for the soil to heat up or the danger of a late spring frost or snow to pass. Number 2, save money. I took these images and prices from my local hardware store this spring, last spring, I should say. For a 2-pack of beefsteak tomato plants, they wanted $12.99. That's about $6.50 per plant. Why do that when you can purchase a packet of tomato seeds for $1.78? Say there are 50 seeds in that packet, that equates to about 4 cents per plant. And even though you'll be putting in some labor and time yourself, the cost benefit to me is well worth it. And there are more benefits. Grow healthy plants. And isn't that the healthiest cucumber plant you've ever laid eyes on? I just think there's nothing better than picking a cucumber right off the vine and eating it. There's nothing better tasting. So much different than that waxed up version we buy from the grocery store, right? I never even liked cucumbers until I grew my own. Think about it. If you buy a seedling from your garden center, you have no idea of its history. That plant's been growing for at least 8 weeks and probably much longer if you see those tomato plants with the fruit already on them. And who knows how that plant's been treated? Did you ever walk into one of these big box stores and have to fight off the urge to grab a hose and give those poor things some water? I know I have. Not to mention wondering what chemicals the plant's been treated with. So if you care about organic gardening, starting from seed is the best way to go. Number 4, try different varieties. To me, one of the most fun things to do on a winter's day like this is to dive into those seed catalogs. If you don't get seed catalogs delivered to your house, just place one order. That will change quickly. This is just a handful of the catalogs that get delivered to my door each winter. And in any given seed catalog, you can pick it up and find 30 different varieties of tomatoes, just tomatoes. So if you want to try something new and different, say kohlrabi or okra, spaghetti squash, whatever. Look to the seed catalogs and not necessarily the seed stand at the local garden center for variety. I keep these catalogs for the entire season because some of them are like a seed Bible. They contain so much information on the plant and on the specific variety. It's very helpful, much more information than you could put on the back of a seed packet. And number 5, create a fun learning experience. And I love this picture. It makes me smile every time I see it. Look at the concentration on this little girl's face. Every time I see a new seedling break through the soil, I'm amazed. Imagine that through the eyes of a child. There's a wealth of opportunity for both academic and developmental learning here. I could think obviously of science and math, but what about writing, fine motor skills, patience, collaboration? I could keep going, but you get the idea. So now that you're inspired, the question is, what should I grow? Well, the options might seem overwhelming at first, and really they are. There's so many options. But you might want to ask yourself a few questions in order to narrow this down. But first, I'd like to offer my own piece of advice, which is start small and start big. Well, what do I mean by that? There we go. By small, I mean the number of plants, the number of varieties. When I first started, I was really overly ambitious. I overbought seeds, and I had so many plants growing that all 5 shelves of my grow lights were filled. And I only live here with my husband, so it was just too much. You don't need a lot of space to start seeds, especially if you're just growing for your own garden. Think about it. Do you really need these 18 tomato plants for a family of 4? Do you really need 18 of anything? For a beginner, I recommend starting with just a few seedlings of 1 or 2 vegetables. Just grow your favorites, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, whatever. If you want to start a whole tray of 1 vegetable like this, you can always share seedlings with your neighbors or with a local community garden. Sorry. By big, I mean larger seeds are easier to work with. For example, these squash seeds versus tiny basil seeds. Especially if you're new to this, and especially if you're working with children, larger seeds are just easier to handle. I once tried growing flowers from seed. I think they were impatient, if I remember. And I ordered the seeds online, very excited and hopeful about filling the border of my perennial bed with these plants. When I got the packet and opened it, inside was a capsule, and I kid you not, a little note that said, yes, they are in there. Well, needless to say, as a novice, I didn't do so well, and my results were not as depicted in the catalog. I'm still not sure if those seeds really were in there or not. They were like dust. I couldn't even see them. Oh, well, the point that I'm trying to make is that don't let these lush photos in the catalog fool you. You might not get the results you see in that picture at first. This is a learning process. So start small and start big. As I said, the focus of my talk is on vegetables, but I just put this slide in for the flower lovers out there because you can start many annual and perennial flowers indoors as well. Some flowers that are suited to starting indoors are shown here, but there are many others. So save those seed catalogs and do your research online. I'm going to go back to vegetables now. What do you want to grow? Well, ultimately, it's your choice. Many seeds can be started indoors, but some are more conducive to this. In our growing zone in Monmouth County, New Jersey, solanaceous vegetables like these tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers are best started indoors. Our climate doesn't allow enough time during the growing season to bring these to harvest if we direct sow them, because they have to be sown in warm soil. Things like garlic, potatoes, and onions are not grown from seed hereabouts for the same reason. And some vegetables just don't like to be started indoors. Think about root vegetables like these carrots, beets, and turnips. Transplanting them upsets the development of the root, which is the part we want to harvest. These plants do better when sown directly in your vegetable bed at the right time. Other vegetables, like peas and radishes, grow so quickly and are so easy to sow directly into the garden that you need not take up space in your limited indoor growing area. But truly, everything else is an option for growing from seed indoors. And that leaves a heck of a lot of vegetables that you can start indoors. So ask yourself these questions. What do you want to grow? Well, what do you like to eat? Do you want to try something new and exotic? For whom are you growing? Just your family? Or maybe a donation to a community garden? Or maybe you want to share some seedlings with your friends and neighbors? How much space do you have? If you have a one-tiered grow light and you start with a flat of cells, remember that you'll have to transplant those into larger pots before they're ready to go outside. Will you be able to fit 36 3-inch pots under your lights? Also, remember some of these tiny seedlings eventually will take up a lot of space in your garden. Just think about a mature summer squash plant. That could take up a 3-foot square area in your garden or more just by itself. So you need to consider both your indoor and your outdoor space. And finally, what are your growing conditions? I have lots of shade, which is never good for vegetable gardening. And I struggle with that. But some vegetables do better with a little less than full sun. Here's a list on the left of some vegetables that do okay with 6 to 8 hours of sun per day. Think of leafy greens like lettuce, arugula, and spinach. And also peas, broccoli, and carrots do okay with less than a full day's sun. On the other hand, things like tomatoes, cucumbers, and melons need a full dose of sunshine every day. And by a full dose, I mean 8 hours or more. In general, as a rule of thumb, you can think of the plants that we're growing for their fruit rather than for their leaf, stem, or root are the ones that need the most sun. Well, what do you need to start? There are some essential supplies and equipment that you will need in order to be successful, which leads me to my first learning experience: not enough light. Artificial light is an absolute must. Nobody can convince me that I can grow strong, healthy seedlings indoors without an artificial light source. Even if you have your seedlings in the southern facing window in your house, the direct sunlight is only going to be hitting those plants maybe 5 or 6 hours a day. And there's so much less daylight in late winter and early spring when we're often starting these seeds. It's not direct light, and it's only hitting that one side of the plant. These seedlings in this picture are reaching and reaching for that needed light, and your plants will be leggy and weak as well. Whereas with artificial light, my seedlings are happy in their 14 to 16 hour daily dose of light. Just to note, just as there's such a thing as not enough light, there's also such a thing as too much light. Plants need a period of darkness to rest, just like we do. So don't think that 24 hours of light is a good thing. There are 2 types of supplemental light you can choose from: fluorescent and LED. The incandescent lights, like the bulb in your table lamp, are not recommended for a number of reasons. Number 1, they're not a good source of blue light. Number 2, they're not energy efficient. And number 3, they put out a lot of heat, which can burn the tender leaves of your seedlings. There are many ready-to-use options out there, and I find that the LED versions are a bit more expensive than the fluorescent. This is just a comparison of a 1-shelf LED stand and a 1-shelf fluorescent stand that I found online. A pretty big investment in either case for something you'll be using only maybe 8 to 12 weeks a year. And I don't want to turn this into a talk about lighting, although it is a key element to success. There are pros and cons to using LED versus fluorescent, and I'll let you do your own research on this. I've provided a link in your handout to a University of Maryland article on this subject for further information. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about the lighting system that's worked well for me. And I provided a detailed list of the components in your handout as well. So I have this 4-foot wide, 6-tier utility shelf on wheels. The wheels are a convenience that I love because I keep this, when it's in use, in the finished part of my basement. And when I'm done with it for the season, I just throw all my equipment and supplies on the shelves and wheel it away out of sight. I use the top shelf for storage, and from each of the top shelves, I suspended 2 4-foot wide fluorescent shop light fixtures using chains and S hooks, so that I can adjust the height of the lights as my plants grow. In each fixture, I alternated 1 cool and 1 warm fluorescent light tube. The plants need a full spectrum of visible light, so it's important that you use both if you're using fluorescent lights. I also take the extra step of rotating my plant trays each time I take them out to water them. I purchased my tubes online, but they're also available in hardware stores, and they're clearly labeled cool and warm. I zip tied the electrical cords to the legs of the shelf on the left side here and labeled each plug so I don't have a tangled mess of electrical cords, and I can easily see which cord will turn on which light. The cords are plugged into one of 2 surge protector strips and then into a timer. The cost for everything was about $350, and it took a few hours to assemble. Most of that time was really spent unpacking the housings and the tubes because they were well wrapped because they were ordered online. Here's just a close-up of the suspended light fixtures and the cool and warm light tubes. You can see the difference in the lighting between the cool and the warm. It's clear. On each shelf, I can fit 2 trays of 12 6-packs each, and that's 720 seedlings. That's a lot of seedlings. I don't suggest you dive in this deeply as a beginner. You can scale back my version to 1 or 2 shelves, but be aware of 2 things. You can't add on to this design if you decide later you want more shelves. You would have to buy a new shelving unit. And number 2, once your seeds have germinated, unless you're only growing one particular type and variety of plant, your seedlings are going to be growing at different rates and to different sizes. So the rule of thumb for artificial lighting is 2 to 3 inches above the top of the plant. If you try to keep different height plants under the same lights, like in this picture, those smaller plants are not going to be close enough to the light source. So one suggestion for this would be maybe to raise the smaller plants up, put them on a box or something to get them closer to the light, or maybe just lower one side of the light fixture and arrange the plants from smallest to tallest and just gradually raise them like that. Just a suggestion. All right, containers. Of course, you're going to need something to put your growing medium and your seeds in, right? And there are numerous options. This is a popular one. It comes all in a neat package, including the medium. Starting from the bottom, there's a watering tray, which obviously holds your water. And an inverted watering tray, so let's call it a stand, with a capillary mat on the stand. And the capillary mat is just a piece of foam that's going to absorb that water and bring it up to your planting tray. The planting tray is going to come with little pellets, usually of peat moss or cocoa coir in them, which are going to have to be hydrated before you sow. And then on top of it all sits this clear dome, which is supposed to, contain the moisture and encourage germination. I know a lot of people, a lot of experienced gardeners actually, who like this option, but I've told you that I'm going to offer my personal successes and failures. So I have to let you know that I have tried these and I found that the excessive dampness from the watering mat and the plastic dome can lead to problems like mold and fungi that can lead to damping off. And I'll talk about damping off later. If you use these kits, I strongly recommend you lose the plastic cover as soon as you see the first seedlings begin to emerge. These kits can be a bit pricey, but I do know of people who reuse them year after year. They just need to be sterilized before reusing. And I will also touch on sterilizing later as well. Also, the individual cells that hold these plants tend to be very small. So you should be aware that you'll be needing to repot these seedlings into larger pots almost immediately after the first true leaves appear. Actually, the plants in this picture look to me like they're in need of repotting already. And just going back to my start small advice, be aware that there are 40 plants in this small tray. 40. I prefer these reusable plants.
I'm sorry, Cheryl. There's a couple questions about the lights.
About lights?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is the rule of 2 to 3 inches above the top of the plants also true for LED bulbs as well as fluorescent bulbs?
Well, I have fluorescent bulbs, so that's what I'm familiar with. I have heard that it's not necessary with LED lights, but all of the LED light fixtures, the ready-made ones that I've seen, go back to that slide. They're all adjustable. They're all adjustable on chains, just like the fluorescent ones are. So I don't know for sure, but I would suggest that it makes sense to me that it would be better closer.
I agree. Also, and I think you may have covered this, but since Cheryl's lights are hanging on a chain, can't she just raise and lower the lights on the chain?
Yes, and that's what I do.
That's what you do. I thought so.
Yeah. This picture is not my lighting fixture. Slide 22. I just did that to show that if you only have one light, you're not going to be able to achieve that if you have different height plants.
Great. I have found when I use the self-watering trays for seed starting, I also put a heating mat under the tray until the seedlings emerge. What do you think? Or are you going to go over that still?
I'm going to talk about heat mats in a little bit.
Okay. Thank you. You're good.
Okay, so we were here, right? Okay, I prefer these reusable plastic 6-packs or small individual pots. These are all my containers and these are all new. You may say, oh, plastic, really? But I do reuse these after sterilizing. And by the way, a large supply of these was included in my initial $350 investment. Along with these, I also purchased flats or trays, rectangular trays, some with drainage holes and some without. And I'll talk more about that when we get to watering. There are a number of biodegradable options. These cow pots, core pots, and peat pots are options. Excuse me. The cow pots are made of composted cow manure, composted. Core pots are compressed coconut coir, and peat pots are made out of peat moss. All of these are meant to be planted directly into the ground to decompose. That's one plus, right? No waste. The other plus is that they reduce transplant shock, as the roots of the plants are not going to be disturbed by taking them out of the container before you put them in the ground. But first, I recommend you learn what the pots are made of before purchasing. Sometimes added glues or binders holding the pots together might prevent the pots from breaking down as quickly as you'd like, which could actually hurt the development of the plant. In particular, to my eye, this cocoa core pot in the center photo looks like it might have had some help holding it together. And you might want to cut off the bottom of the pot before planting just to be safe. If you do choose to use a pot like this, I suggest you cut away the upper part of the pot to be sure that and plant the whole thing below the surface. Like, see this part here that's the soil does not come up. Cut that away. Otherwise, the rims might wick away water from the soil and from the roots of your plant. Another thing to keep in mind, once your seedlings start to grow in these, they'll have to be planted directly into the ground. You can't really repot them. Well, you could, but it just kind of defeats the purpose to me. And you can actually see a couple of roots starting to escape from the cow pot on the left if you look at the bottom of the picture. So tearing away the whole container from the roots is not a good idea. Here's an example of a tool that creates a pot out of old newspaper. Just another economical and biodegradable option for you. Your strip of newspaper is wrapped around this pestle and then pressed into the mortar to form the bottom of the pot. I'm not endorsing this necessarily. I just want to demonstrate that there are many options out there. There are also soil block tools of various sizes. No container needed at all. If you purchase multiple size molds, you can easily repot into a larger block just by dropping the smaller one into it. These blocks need to be contained snugly in a container of some kind to keep them from falling apart. This can be avoided by making sure the medium isn't too dry or too wet when you lift the blocks. Gently lifting with a spatula can also help. These tools are a bit pricey again, and you may want to look into this if you're planning to do this on a larger scale and for a long time. For a beginner, I would save your money on these and see if this is something worth the long-term investment. To sum up, almost any container is okay as long as it has drainage holes and as long as it is sterile. I've seen yogurt cups, egg cartons, egg shells, plastic clamshells, and paper towel tubes cut into 3-inch strips. As I was researching for this talk, I saw so many pictures of seedlings planted in eggshells that I felt compelled to comment on this. I don't know why you would do this. Although the shells do contain a lot of calcium, in this form, it's not going to be available to your seedling. And you can't just plant this shell in the ground because eggshells decompose very, very slowly. You'd have to break up the shell to give the roots room to grow, which would cause some transplant trauma. So I vote no to the eggshell container. Whatever you do decide to use, though, as I said, must be sterile and have drainage. You can add drainage to any container by poking a few holes in the bottom with a sharp knife or other tool. To reuse plastic containers, you want to wash off the loose dirt with soap and water, and then soak in 1 part bleach to 9 parts water for at least 15 minutes. Then you're going to rinse them in clear water and let them air dry. And you're done. This applies to seed cells, trays, and all your other containers. For sterilizing my equipment, I use a large rectangular plastic bin, which accommodates my trays or my flats nicely, so I can just drop them in there and let them sit. I also should mention at this point that you're going to need to sterilize your tools before you begin. It's always a good idea to clean your tools frequently, but it's especially important when starting seeds inside. The next necessity is your growing medium. Notice I didn't say soil or dirt. Seed starting mix is soilless. Don't use garden soil or potting soil because garden soil contains pathogens that may harm your fragile seedlings or even prevent the seedlings from germinating. Potting soil is heavy and will compact when wet and may make it difficult or impossible for your seeds to germinate. There are many ready-to-use seed starting mixes available at your local garden store and online. They're soilless, like I said, sterile, and very light, which allows those first tiny leaves to break through and for lots of aeration around your roots of your baby seedlings. Consult the labels. They will tell you what the ingredients are. And typically, they're going to be either peat or coco coir, vermiculite, perlite, some combination of those four. Some may include mycorrhizae, which are good fungi that have a symbiotic relationship with the roots of your seedling. They actually become a part of the root I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to try to give you a scientific explanation for that. Just know that it's a good thing for root development to have these in your starting mix. The benefits are increased nutrient uptake, added resistance to disease and stress, and higher yields. Mixes that contain these mycorrhizae should be used within 1 year for optimal effectiveness. If you choose, you can make your own mix by combining cocoa coir, peat moss, vermiculite, and or perlite. There are many easy recipes online, and I included a link to one in your handout. All of these products are available at local garden centers and are relatively inexpensive, but you're going to buy them in bulk. You know, there's maybe big bags of this stuff. Avoid those recipes that include compost because compost isn't sterile. Some may suggest sterilizing compost in your oven or your microwave, but I understand you would not enjoy the smell of that. On the left, here's what cocoa coir looks like when you're ready to start your mix. Cocoa coir comes from the husk of the coconut fruit, and it's a byproduct of the coconut industry. It's not the very coarse exterior hairs that you can see on the outer shell, but the underlayer of finer fibers. Cocoa coir is usually sold as a compressed brick, and it expands to like 5 to 7 times its volume when hydrated. So a little of this goes a long way. On the right is peat moss. And the terms peat, peat moss, and sphagnum peat moss are used interchangeably, referring to the stuff harvested from the bottom layers of a wetland bog. Most ready-made mixes you're going to find are peat-based. And this isn't a talk about peat moss, but your takeaway should be this. On average, peat accumulates at a rate of less than 4 inches per century. For this reason, we can hardly call peat moss a renewable resource. If you're starting just a few plants, your best option might be the pre-mixed bag of seed starting mix. The DIY blends usually call for mass quantities of the ingredients, probably way more than you're going to need if you're starting small. But if you break these recipes into parts rather than gallons or bushels, you'll be able to closely replicate the mix. And it's up to you and your personal feelings about this topic, really what you want to do. All right, there are some other things that you might want to consider. Heat mats. I bought a heat mat back in 2018, and it's still in the box. You may need one depending on your growing environment and what you're trying to grow. I know that solanaceous plants such as tomatoes and peppers like to be warm in order to germinate, but I've had no problem growing them without a heat pad. My finished basement is a constant temperature during the heating season when I'm starting my seeds, but your situation might be different. A digital thermometer is important. Mine monitors humidity and temperature and records the high and low of both. So I can see what's going on down there for the 23 out of 24 hours a day that I'm not down there. As you can see on this particular day, my seedlings were dry and toasty under my fluorescent lights. Cool weather crops like lettuce, spinach, cabbage, and kale won't need that extra heat ever. These plants can tolerate colder conditions. Tomatoes and peppers may need that extra heat to germinate under your particular conditions. After that, the heat mat should be put away. Using a heat mat after seeds have germinated can cause damage to your young plants by overheating the medium and cooking the roots. And to go back to that question about putting the heat mat under the watering tray, that's probably, I'm not sure if that would heat up the water enough to make it reach the planting tray. By the time it gets to the capillary mat, it's not in direct contact with the heating pad anymore. So I'm not sure that that would really have any effect on the soil, heat up the soil itself. I'm not sure. But I hope I answered that question. Air circulation. I know some who attach these clip-on fans to add air circulation to their growing area. The fan shouldn't be aimed directly on the plants, maybe slightly above the plant and on the lowest speed. I don't do this, but it is beneficial because it does mimic outdoor conditions a little bit more than just your stagnant air in your basement or wherever you are growing. Excuse me. Excuse me. It keeps things dry and can shorten the hardening off period and prevent damping off. And I will get to those two topics also in a little bit. I do run my hand gently over the top of my plants each time I check on them, which serves a similar purpose of circulating that air. I also do that to give them a little love and petting and let them know I'm rooting for them. Remember that you might have to water more frequently if you do use a fan. Things will dry out a little bit more quickly, so be aware of that. And water, well, of course, you're going to need water for your seedlings. And it's convenient, but not absolutely necessary to have a water source near at hand. For me, that's a slop sink in the unfinished part of my basement, which is just a few steps away from where I have my grow lights. It just makes things easier than having to carry your water up and down or back and forth, and it just makes watering less of a chore. Just something to think about when you're doing your planning. And you're going to need one more thing. Oh, the seeds. Right, of course you're going to need the seeds. First, if you have a box full of seeds like this that you've collected over the years, remember that older seeds have a lower germination rate. So if you've saved seeds from last year or 2 years or maybe even 3 years ago, they're probably still okay. More than that, you might not get the best germination results. So before making your plan, check the dates on any seeds you already have and clean house. You're going to want to make a plan before you start ordering your seeds. Think about the questions you asked earlier. Now's the time to pick up that seed catalog again and refine the answers to these questions. Then go ahead and order those seeds. And I mean right now, like today, February 5th, great time. Do you want to pause for questions, Diane?
Sure, I just have a couple. Do you ever water from above, or does the water come from the trays the plants are sitting in through the roots? How about when you first plant the seeds?
That's all coming up.
Okay.
All those questions will be answered in a little bit.
Another comment, which is a very good point. Some people are allergic to the ingredients in pre-made soil mix bags because sometimes they use shellfish byproducts. So some people, if you're allergic to shellfish, that could be a problem. So don't be afraid to make your own soil mix if that's the case.
Right, and the soil mixes should tell you if they contain that.
Right, I would hope so. I have a question from Carolyn, but it's not completed. I only see part of it. You do a seed germination test of your old seeds. That's another question from someone.
Oh, yeah, that doesn't sound like I guess that's a statement, right?
Somebody says, people know how to do a germination test of old seeds, or do you do that?
I don't do that, but you can do that. You can just wet them in some paper towel and see if they, what the rate is, what the germination rate is.
Okay. Oh, Carolyn's saying, where did it go? Can I sponge on bleach solution instead of submerging it?
And can she what? I didn't get that.
Just sponge it on instead of soaking it.
It's recommended that you soak it for at least 15 minutes. So I don't think sponging it is going to have the same effect.
Okay, and another question that came in earlier that I think other people might have is, do I need to sterilize them if they were outside in the freezing cold all winter?
I would.
Exactly. Okay, are you going to talk about saving seeds at all?
No, I don't get to saving seeds. That's
okay. All right, somebody was just said your thoughts on saving seeds from store-bought produce such as squash.
Oh, because of that, probably because of that slide I had earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
I, I wouldn't recommend saving seeds from a grocery store fruit. No.
You just don't know what you're going to get.
Right.
It's a hybrid, you don't know what you're going to get. That's a whole nother topic. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. So while you're waiting for your seeds to arrive, now that you've ordered them, figure out your timing. Find your growing zone if you don't know it, and your first and your last frost dates, and create a plan for when to start your seeds. Not every seed is going to be started at the same time. For example, you might find you can start things like broccoli, lettuce, and herbs much earlier than you want to start tomatoes and peppers because they're going to be able to be transplanted outside sooner than those tomatoes and peppers would. There are many online planting calendars that can help you, and I've included a link to one in your handout, but there are many. You should also be guided by the current conditions in your growing area, as well as the microenvironment of your own yard. As an example, let's take peppers. These seeds need to grow in warm conditions. They can't be transplanted into the garden until all danger of frost has passed. Remember, the average last frost date is only a guideline, not a guarantee. So to be safe, I add 1 or 2 weeks to the average last frost date to arrive at my safe planting date. And this information is all based on growing zone 7 in my county, where Monmouth County, New Jersey. So yours may be a lot different. All right, so working backwards from mid-May, I calculate 6 to 8 weeks for growing and hardening off. Then I add to that 8 to 10 days for germination, and that puts me just about the first week of March to sow these seeds. Again, this is only an estimate, and remember the seed packet is going to give you a lot of valuable information. The information you find on a seed packet varies from supplier to supplier. Typically, they're all going to include an enticing picture of the vegetable and a description of how much you're going to enjoy eating it. On the front of this particular pepper seed pack, we can see that the plant will require full sun, which 8+ hours, and we can expect to harvest peppers 2.5 months after we sow the seeds. On the back, we have some important planting instructions. The top figure shows that you're going to sow your seed 1/4 inch deep into your medium. And when you go to plant outside, the second diagram is showing you that they must be placed at least 12 inches apart. And if you have limited space, you can grow this plant in a container. This packet also tells us when to sow the seeds indoors, when to transplant into larger containers, and when to transplant outside. Again, this information varies widely. I've ordered seeds from small growers in the past where the seeds arrived in a little manila envelope with just the type and variety on them. So I had to go to my seed catalog or online to get all this information on this particular plant. That's why I suggest you save these seed catalogs. In your handout, I've included a link to a very detailed explanation of how to interpret all the information on a seed packet. So how do I keep track of all this information? Well, I like to keep a diary. It doesn't have to be glamorous. Just keep track of what you sow and when it germinates, when it's ready to plant outside, when you watered, when you fed, what problems you encountered, etc. This will be an enormous help when you go back and reflect on the past and plan for the future. This is the diary and seed box that my daughters gifted me in 2018, and I was thrilled to get them. I have one big problem. This book is just too beautiful to write in. I just cannot bring myself to write in it. And the seed box only holds my beautiful seed packets that I don't have the heart to break open. For example, this beautiful packet of bergamot seeds. It's about 4 years old now, and I'll never grow these seeds, but who cares? I have this beautiful vision of what a seed box and a diary should look like, right? And I keep these right here on my baker's rack in my kitchen, and they look really pretty there. But here's my reality. A plastic container of seed packets kept in the unfinished part of my basement. By the way, you always want to keep your seeds stored in a cool, dark, dry place. And here's a page from my actual diary. On this page, I just recorded what I had sown and the day these things germinated. As you can see, a couple had not germinated yet. You may want to keep a spreadsheet instead on your computer or record the information on your phone. Whatever method you choose, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Are you ready to get growing? At this point, you're all set with your clean containers, your medium of your choice, your grow lights, your seeds, your water, and a heat mat if you want. When with all these materials at your side, we're ready to get growing. The first thing we need to do is prepare the medium. Whatever medium you choose, it should be hydrated before you fill your containers. The reason is that these mixes tend to be very light and aerated and almost tend to repel water initially. So if you were to fill a cell with dry medium and then sow your seed and then try to fill it with water, the water would cause all this mix and seed to swirl around before it absorbed the water, and you would end up not even knowing where your seed ended up. To hydrate, I place the medium in a large container and I add water gradually to it. I add warm water, like 75 to 80 degrees, because the seeds will need warmth to germinate and there's no need to make the water medium warm up to room temperature. You might as well give it that kickstart. So I mix together by hand until it's well combined and all the medium is evenly moistened. The mix should be damp but not sodden. When you squeeze it, it should form a clump in your hand, but should be easily broken apart with your thumb. If it drips water when you squeeze, it's too wet. Just add a little more medium. If it doesn't clump together, you need to add a little more water. I try to just moisten as much as I'll need on that day because I'm not really a big fan of keeping moist potting mix lying around covered. In order to fill your containers, I just scoop out a clump of medium and spread it over my 6-pack or my cells. And then I press down gently with my thumbs and I repeat the process to form a loose medium in which to sow my seeds. You don't want to compress too firmly. You don't want to pack it in there because you want to maintain that aeration so that the seed can do what it wants to do. As a side note, some seeds will germinate faster if you pre-soak them. Slow to germinate seeds like parsley and carrots and hard-coated seeds such as peas can be soaked in warm water for a few hours before planting to soften the seed coat. With that said, most of your vegetable seeds will need no pre-treatment. And now that your medium is prepared and in your containers, you're ready to sow your seeds. And now's the time to get ready for the rest of my learning experiences. Number 2, planting too deep. Again, the seed package should tell you the proper planting depth, but as a rule of thumb, sow your seeds about 1 to 2 times as deep as the seed is wide. So for a very small seed, that might mean just putting it on the surface and sprinkling a little vermiculite over it and patting it down. For larger seeds, you can use a pencil to make a shallow hole and place the seed and then gently cover over it and pat it down. The most you'll want to plant your seeds is 1/2 to 1 inch below the surface, and that's only for large seeds like cucumbers and melons. Planting too deep may prevent your seeds from germinating at all. Think of yourself trying to kick your way out of a 10-foot pile of dirt. These seeds want to grow. We just need to enable them. You can strive for the perfect depth, but planting too shallow, in my opinion, is a safer bet than planting too deep. The seed will still germinate, and you can always help it along by adding a little bit of cover over exposed roots if needed. I usually sow 2 to 3 seeds per cell. Well, why do I do that? This gives you a good shot at 100% germination every time. And I'll talk about what to do with more than 100% germination a little later. For smaller seeds like this basil on the right, I overseed. These seeds are small and they'll hold up okay to competition. You can repot this entire cell into a larger container and the plants will succeed. Learning experience number 3, not labeling your plants right away. This is a big one. No matter how you do it, it is important. I know I can't tell what this plant is, let alone the variety of the plant, when the cotyledon first emerged. By the way, when I refer to cotyledon, I'm talking about these first embryonic leaves that emerge from the seed case and that look nothing like the true leaves of the plant. Their function is to act as an initial energy source. In this picture, you can see the first true leaf beginning to grow on this cucumber seedling. Maybe some experienced gardeners out there can identify this plant at this point, but I dare you to name the cultivar. Why is that important? Well, what if you sowed 2 different varieties of cucumber? Some germinated 100% and others didn't do as well. Or you find that one variety stood up particularly well to disease, or maybe you just really love the taste of one variety. Knowing the specifics will serve you well in planning for next year. What should you put on your label? Well, I suggest at a minimum, type, variety, and date sown. For example, prize head lettuce 3/1/2020. My dates happen to be on the back of these labels. Well, why did I do that, you may ask? Because that's a lot to fit on a label that needs to be no more than 2 inches above the surface of the medium. Remember, your light source should be 2 to 3 inches from the top of the seedling. If the seedling is just emerging, you're not going to be able to fit that under there if that tag is more than 2 inches tall. So if you can't fit all that information on your label, just write a number or letter on the tag and note the full information in your diary. Just don't lose your diary. And when you transplant these from cells to larger individual plants, remember you'll have to label each plant separately. I use these white plastic labels. You can buy 100 for about $4. And I recommend using UV resistant markers or paint pens. Also hear that pencils hold up to the elements. But if you use a Sharpie on these, you might find them difficult to read by the time you're going to plant them outside. And they're going to be blank by the time you go to harvest. In a few days, you'll get the thrill of seeing your seeds germinate. As soon as you see that first seedling pop its head out, turn your lights on, if you haven't already. I put my trays under lights the day I sow them, and get rid of that plastic cover. Learning experience number 4, sowing too soon or too late. In my area, the average first frost date is October 27th, and average last frost date is April 16th. Last fall, I was still waiting for a hard frost on November 27th. And this spring, who knows when our last frost will be? Hopefully this is it. You should plan to start your seeds backwards from the date that they are ready to go outside. I know I've already talked about this in the planning stage, but if you sow too soon, you're going to have to deal with repotting into larger containers, probably more than once, before transplanting. Delaying transplanting till the plant is mature or even flowering may cause it to go through severe stress when transplanted, which could take weeks to recover from. And the plant that you're looking at right now is very, very root bound and should have been repotted much earlier. And by the way, never pick up a seedling like this. To remove a seedling from its cell, you want to place the stem gently between your index and middle fingers and turn the container upside down and pat or squeeze the container until the entire root ball falls out. This is not good for the plant. If you plant too late, you may be forced to transplant a seedling that's not quite ready, or you may not have enough time in the growing season to bring that plant to harvest. There's a window here. You don't have to be stressed about absolute deadlines. And again, that's why we make that plan and keep that diary. Now that you've sown your seeds and they've germinated and you're watching your young seedlings develop, what else do they need immediately? Well, water is the first thing that comes to my mind, which leads to my learning experience number 5, watering incorrectly. Of course, your seedlings will need water. I check my seedlings every day to be sure they have enough water. It's very easy to tell if the medium is dried out and the plants need water. As you can see in this picture, the medium in the cells looks very different than the dry medium below. Don't let your plants become stressed before you water them, but don't keep them soggy and saturated either. And this is the wrong way to water. Here's the answer to that last question. Never water from above whenever possible. Wet leaves can lead to fungal and mold problems that spread disease. Splashing water on the surface can splash pathogens onto the seedlings. And watering from above may not reach deeply enough to get the water to the roots of your plant. If you have to water from above, direct the water at the base of the plant and try to water the soil rather than the plant. I recommend always bottom watering seedlings. My method of watering is this. Under my lights, my cells sit in my flat or my tray that has drainage holes to provide that constant air circulation as much as possible. When I want to water them, I take the cells out from under the lights and move them to a tray that's filled with warm water, obviously a tray without drainage holes, filled with warm water, and I let them sit there for 15 minutes or so. And you can see by the change in color of the medium when they've had enough water. So I just take them back, put them into the tray with the holes and pop them back under the lights. And just, I mentioned warm water to room temperature water, because cool water slows down plant growth and increases risk of infection. Okay, I do want to take a minute to talk about damping off. I've mentioned it several times now, and it's a problem for many new gardeners. This is what it looks like, but what causes it? Well, it's the sudden death of your baby seedlings, and it's typically caused by overwatering and less than sterile conditions. After all that work and nurturing, I'd be heartbroken to find my seedlings looking like this. So how to prevent this common problem? Follow everything I've advised so far. Use sterile medium and tools and containers. Follow everything. Get rid of the moisture dome as soon as you see the first seedlings begin to emerge, and generate some air circulation around your seedlings via whatever method you choose. I promised I would revisit more than 100% germination. If I'm optimistic and I have new seeds, I will expect 100% germination, but many times that doesn't happen. So that's why I like to sow 2 to 3 seeds in each cell, just in case. But now that I have this, these larger seeds, as they begin to grow, they're going to compete with each other for room and for nutrients, and they're going to need to be thinned out. This is a very difficult thing to do, at least for me, because you need to decide which one is going to survive and which one won't. You're going to want to choose the hardiest of the two, and rather than trying to tease out the other plants, I use a pair of small scissors and just snip the weaker plant at the surface. Clip and done. No looking back. This might seem harsh, but your remaining seedling will thank and reward you. Also, trying to separate the roots can lead to trauma for both plants, and maybe neither will be very successful. Feeding. At some point, your seedlings are going to need food. They'll be just fine with the sterile medium until they develop their first leaves. Those seeds have all the energy they need to do what they need to do. But after the first set of real leaves appear and the cotyledon begin to brown and shrivel, your seedlings are going to need nourishment from you. A soluble fertilizer, organic fertilizer at half strength, works well at this stage. Plants need the primary macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK on the fertilizer labels. Don't get nuts about the numbers at this point. A good organic water-soluble fertilizer of just about equal measures is fine. The frequency of watering is going to vary for you, so you don't have to feed every time you water. I find myself watering maybe every other day or so, and I fertilize once every other week. I fertilize using my bottom watering method, and if I have any leftover fertilizer and water mixture left over in the trays when I'm done, I just give it to my houseplants. Potting on, or potting up, as some people refer to it. Especially if you're starting in these tiny cells of the potting kit, you'll ultimately have to repot your seedlings into larger pots before transplanting them outside. This seedling has a healthy root system that hasn't crowded its container yet, so it's the perfect time to pot up so as not to cause trauma to your seedling. And I love the way this person is handling the seedling. Remember, as I described it before, placing your index and middle finger gently around the stem and then guiding the whole root system, the whole root ball out of the container. And my last experience, learning experience, number 6, not hardening off. Hardening off means getting your babies ready for the real world, kind of like the first day of school. You need to prepare them for the harsh reality of living beyond the sheltered world of your basement or your wherever. Oops, sorry. So hardening off is the process of acclimating your plants to face the outdoors. Not doing this is a big mistake. After all of this nurturing, your seedlings will not be able to handle the outdoors all at once. These are my seedlings being introduced to the outdoors. And as you can see, they're being sheltered from sun and wind by my deck railing. During the hardening off process, your plant growth will slow down as the cell walls strengthen and leaf surfaces thicken. You want to gradually reduce watering, but don't let your plants wilt. Also, stop fertilizing now until your seedlings are transplanted into the ground. How to do it? Okay, this is a very gradual process. Think baby steps. Excuse me. When you're bringing your plants in and out daily, be sure to keep them under the grow lights while they're inside. For the first few days, place your plants in a sheltered spot out of wind and sun, preferably on an overcast or a cloudy day. Gradually move them into a place with a bit more exposure, more sun, shade in the afternoon. Next, give them morning sun and dappled afternoon shade. And finally, leave them out overnight in a sheltered spot such as a porch. Make sure to check on expected nighttime temperatures. Your cool season seedlings could tolerate 40 to 50 degree temperatures, but things like tomatoes, melons, and basil will not. They shouldn't be left out until nighttime temperatures reach about 60 degrees. The next step is to plant your seedlings in their permanent place in your garden. And this is the end of our journey. So you're now ready to transplant outside. As I promised at the start of this talk, we've traveled from the initial planning to bringing your seedlings to the point where you'll be transplanting them outside. Now you're on your own. Go for it and assess what went wrong and what went right. Consult your diary and keep your notes up to date for next year. Enjoy your harvest, most importantly, and then start working on next year's plan. Good luck and happy gardening.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was terrific. So if anyone has any questions about our coffee talks, there's an email address, the first one on top, mgmcsymposium@gmail.com. If you live in Monmouth County, you can contact our helpline for general gardening questions. If you live in another county or state, contact your local office. And thank you so much for attending. When this webinar session is ended, a survey will open in your browser. So thank you for sharing your feedback with us, because that helps us to prepare talks that are interesting to you. So if there are any further questions, we can cover those now, and we'll stay on as long as questions come in.
Debbie, several people are asking, will they be able to view this talk after today? So we do post that, right, to our YouTube?
Yes. No, what's going to happen is this is being recorded, and once the recording is available, I am going to send a link to all the registrants. So you will be able to view this recording at your convenience, because a lot of people register, but for whatever reason, they couldn't attend the live presentation. So
Great.
Watch again or watch for the first time.
Thank you. Also, Cheryl, you had a planting chart that was specific to Monmouth County in one of the slides.
Yes.
Is that shareable, or I guess people will see that? Is that in your-
There's a link in the handout.
Okay, great. Great. Okay, questions are coming in. For someone who has limited space in their home, is seed starting still possible? What's the most important thing to consider? Will certain seeds do better? I lost it. Do better than others with a smaller source of artificial light?
Well, if you have limited space, like I said, and you only have the one space for maybe one shelf grow light on your counter, you could still start seeds indoors. You're just not going to be able to start as many. Or if you're starting things that early, cool season crops, like things that can go outside earlier, like lettuce and leafy greens, I'm trying to think. You could start them in cells and then transplant them right from the cells, so you don't have to transplant them into bigger containers and keep them indoors. I know of people that start seeds outdoors, but this is not a talk about that, in cold frames and but if your indoor space is limited, you're just limited to the size of the grow lights. Grow lights are a must, in my opinion. I don't think you can be successful starting seeds indoors without grow lights.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. Also, have you ever hardened off seedlings in a cold frame? Speaking of cold frames.
Yeah, I have not. I don't have cold frames, but it is doable, and you can get that information. You can get that information for sure online, how to do that.
Okay. If you are transplanting to containers instead of sowing in the ground, is there anything you would recommend doing differently?
I assume the containers are going to be outside, right?
Yeah.
No, you still need to do everything I spoke about, including hardening them off. So I would say no.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have.
Laura, is there anything from the chat room that you want to share with everybody?
I guess what I'm trying to do is, I see this has been a learning experience, always is every time we have another one of these events. And it seems like we need to change something with the chat in the future to make it so that people can put the chat to all attendees. Because it's only going to the panelists and then I have to repeat it back. So people's interaction feels like it's just coming from me, but hopefully we'll straighten that out. And, but I want to thank everybody for their, participation and sharing their experiences with their own gardening in the chat.
All right.
We are getting a couple more questions in.
Okay, keep going.
I have had good plants from tomato seeds from a great tomato. Is that okay? If it works for you, right? I guess, again, you would just have to know if it's an open pollinated variety of tomato, you're going to get exactly what you're going to get, the tomato that you took the seeds from the parent of. If you don't know if it's a hybrid, you don't know what you're going to get. So if you know that it's not a hybrid, you could certainly save the seeds from it. You also fill the tray with water when you first plant the seeds rather than water from above. I think you said you did that, right?
Well, when I first sow the seeds, my medium is already moistened because I put it into to the cells that way. I moisten the medium before I put it into the cells, and then I immediately sow.
Can you recommend where you could buy good seeds? Like, we can't really recommend. You could say places that you've used. I know somebody just mentioned Johnny's Seeds, but a lot of the seed places are very reputable.
Just look at that slide, that slide of mine with all my seed catalogs on it. That'll give you most of them.
Yeah. Is there any hope for seeds that have already germinated into a leggy state? That's a tough one.
how I would like to see how leggy that is.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how long they've been growing, I guess.
They would need to at least be under lights at this point.
I would say they probably won't perform very well
Yeah.
if they're already leggy.
Yeah. Somebody said, can you recommend a good soil test? So Rutgers Soils Lab has a great soil test, and we recommend them. It's $20. And you could just go to the Rutgers Soil Testing Lab website. You could download the form, pay right there. You fill out the form, put your soil in there, and they give you instructions how to take the soil, send it to the lab, and you'll get your results emailed to you within 2 weeks. And so they'll tell you what's in your soil and what you have to fertilize with based on the crop you're growing. So they'll tell you what to fertilize with and how often. So that's the best one. If you get a late start on sowing seeds inside, does it make more sense to just put the seed outside instead?
Well, it depends on what you're growing. If you're starting, you never, I don't want to say never because, but you don't want to start things like tomatoes and peppers outside because they're not going to germinate until the soil warms up. And then you're not going to have enough time to bring them to harvest at least in our growing season in Monmouth County.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some seeds, like you say, peppers and tomatoes, eggplant, those, I just think they need a really long, hot germination time, and it's probably not going to work with them, but definitely cucumbers, squash, that should be fine. I have read that you can top trim your tomato and pepper plants as they grow. What do you think? I'm assuming that's the seedlings they're talking about.
Can you repeat that? I didn't get that first part.
Okay. I have read that you can top trim your tomato and pepper plants as they grow. What do you think?
Top trim? Does that
Like
mean
pinch, I guess pinch the tops, prune them back as the seedlings, if they're getting too leggy, maybe?
Well, I know that if you have a seedling that you're transplanting outside or into a larger container, you can bury that tomato stem deeply because it's gonna grow roots from that buried stem. But as far as topping the plant, I mean the suckers are the things that you pinch out. I don't know if topping the plant would be a good idea.
Right. If anything, maybe a tomato, but definitely not a pepper. But I still wouldn't recommend it. I've started my bean seeds by soaking them in water and then putting them between paper towels that I keep changing the paper towels until they actually germinate. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah. If you plant seeds indoors, can you keep them indoors and they'll just keep growing forever and produce fruit and vegetables ongoing, or do they only produce the fruit and vegetables one time a year, I guess, like outside?
I've never tried that. What do you think, Diane?
Maybe if you have a greenhouse, but just as a regular indoor house plant, I doubt you'll get any fruit. They just need too much sun, direct sun. Can you ever sow leafy vegetables directly outside? Once the soil gets to 50 degrees, it will get too warm too quickly for the lettuce to mature in the spring cool weather. I'm not sure what the question is. I mean, I've sown cool weather leafy vegetables probably even through June. I mean, they tend to be very quick, leafy vegetables. It's a quick crop and they do like it cooler. So probably past June, you would not want to sow them and you could pick that up again in the fall. Is that right, Cheryl? Would you agree with that?
I agree with that, yeah.
Okay. Which vegetables do you keep planting and how often, like lettuce, where you'll pull the whole plant out and eat? So I guess I would say you would have to I re-sow beans because I think you get one good crop out of them and then it's a little straggly after that. Peas, you'll get one good crop out of. Lettuce, yeah, you'll pull the whole plant out and eat, but you're not going to really be able to grow that during the summer because it's too hot. Trying to think what else. Radishes, you'll get a couple crops out of radishes to repeat them. Anything else that you could think of, Laura? I'm trying to think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so busy
I know.
chatting with somebody in the chat
Okay.
that I didn't hear what you said.
All right. Yeah, succession planting. Like what else?
Oh, so okay, so actually the chat I was doing with someone privately, which I just figured out how to do, was about garlic. So I'm going to use that as an example.
Oh.
So my garlic I planted in the fall, right? So it's going to be growing up and it's going to be harvested in July, right? So or early July. So I already want to know that I have something growing there. So what happens is I end up putting in some of my squash plants as babies, in or like actually my sweet potatoes, I think I did in between the garlic. And by the time I'm harvesting my garlic, my sweet potato plants are really starting to thrive. So I get really good use of that same spot that particular year for both crops.
Okay. I think that's all I have.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your great questions. Thank you, Cheryl, Laura, and Diane for monitoring all the questions that came in. So thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now. And
Great
I will,
talk, Cheryl.
yeah, I will send the recording to everybody as soon as it's ready. So thank you. Have a wonderful day and hope to see you here next week.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Whew.
Fantastic.